fit part won the medical student Meyer and ribbon of a student at the Moscow School of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture, came one evening to their friend Vasilov, law student, and proposed that he should go with them to Estre for a long while. Vasil did not agree, but eventually dressed himself and went with them unfortunate women he knew only by hearsay and from books, and never once in his life had he been in the houses where they lived. He knew there were immoral women who were forced by the pressure of disastrous circumstances, environment, bad upbringing, poverty, and the like to sell their honor for money. They do not know pure love, have no children, and no legal rights mothers, and sisters mourn them for dead. Science treats them as an evil. Men are familiar with them, but notwithstanding all this, they do not lose the image and likeness of God. They all acknowledge their sin and hope for salvation. They are free to avail themselves of every means of salvation. True society does not forgive people their past, but with God, Mary of Egypt is not lower than the other saints. Whenever Vasilov recognized an unfortunate woman in the street by her costume or her manner, or saw a picture one in a comic paper, there came into his mind every time a story he once read somewhere a pure and heroic young man falls in love with an unfortunate woman and asks her to be his wife, but she, considering herself unworthy of such happiness, poisons herself. Vasilov lived in one of the streets of the Skoy Boulevard when he and his friends came out of the house. It was about 11 o'clock. The first snow had just fallen, and all nature was under the spell of this new snow. The air smelled of snow. The snow cracked softly underfoot, the earth, the roofs, the trees, the benches on the boulevards. All were soft white and young. Owing to this, the houses had a different look from yesterday. The lamps burned brighter. The air was more transparent. The clatter of the cabs was dulled, and there entered into the soul with the fresh, easy, frosty air, feeling like the white, young, feathery snow. To these sad chores, unknowing, the medical began to sing in a pleasant tenor, an unknown power entices. Behold the mill, the painter's his voice took him up. It is now fallen to ruin. Behold the mill, it is now fallen to ruin. The medical repeated, raising his eyebrows and sadly shaking his head. He was silent for a while, passed his hand over his forehead, trying to recall the words, and began to sing in a loud voice, and so will let the passers-by look back here long ago. Came free love to me. All three went into a restaurant, and without taking off their coats, they each had 2 thimblefuls of vodka at the bar. Before drinking the second Basil noticed a piece of cork in his vodka, lifted the glass. As I looked at it for a long while with a short-sighted frown, the Medicalico misunderstood his expression and said, "Well, what are you staring at? No philosophy, please. Vodkas made to be drunk, caviar to be eaten, women to sleep, with snow to walk on live like a man for one evening." "Well, I've nothing to say," said Vasil laughingly. "I'm not refusing." The vodka warmed his breast. He looked at his friends, admired, and envied them how balanced everything is in these healthy, strong, cheerful people. Everything in their minds and souls is smooth and rounded off. They sing, have a passion for theater, paint, talk continually, and drink, and they never have a headache the next day. They are romantic and dissolute, sentimental and insolent. They can work and go on the loose and laugh at nothing and talk rubbish. They are hot-headed, honest, heroic, and as human beings not a bit worse than Vasil, who watches his every step and word, who is a careful, cautious, and able to give the smallest rifle the dignity of a problem. And he made up his mind, if only for one evening, to live like his friends, to let himself go and be free from his own control. Must he drink vodka? He'll drink even if his head falls to pieces tomorrow. Must he be taken to women? He'll laugh, play the fool, and give a joking answer to disapproving passers. By he came out of the restaurant laughing. He liked his friends, one in a battered hat with a wide brim, who ate the aesthetic, the sort of the other, in a seal-kinneyed cap, not very poor, with a pretense of learned bohemia. He liked the snow, the paleness, the lamp lights, the dear black prints which the passers' feet left on the snow. He liked the air, and above all, the transparent, tender, naive, virgin tone, which can be seen in nature only twice in a year, when everything is covered in snow on bright days in spring, and on moonlight nights when the ice breaks on the river. To these sad shores unknowing, he began to sing Soto, an unknown power entices. And all the way, for some reason or other, he and his friends had this melody on their lips. All three hummed it mechanically, out of time with each other. Imagined how in about 10 minutes he and his friends would knock at a door, how they would stealthily walk through the narrow little passages and dark rooms to the women, how he would take advantage of the dark, suddenly strike a match, and see lit up a suffering face and a guilty smile there He will surely find a fair or a dark woman in a white nightgown with her hair loose. She will be frightened at the light, dreadfully confused, and say, "Good God, what are you doing? Blow it out." All this was frightening but curious and novel part. Two of the friends turned out of Trubnoy Square into Gratovka and soon arrived at the street, which Vasil knew only from hearsay, seeing 2 rows of houses with brightly lighted windows and wide open doors, and hearing the gay sound of pianos and fiddle sounds which flew out of all the doors and mingled in a strange confusion, as if somewhere in the darkness over the rooftops an unseen orchestra were tuning. Vasil was bewildered and said, "What a lot of houses." "What's that?" said the medical. "There are 10 times as many in London. There are 100,000 of these women there." The cabmen sat on their boxes quiet and indifferent, as in other streets on the pavement walked the same. Passers-by, no one was in a hurry, no one hid his face in his collar, no one shook his head reproachfully, and in this indifference, in the confused sound of pianos and fiddles in the bright windows and wide opening doors, something very free, impotent, bold, and daring could be felt. It must have been the same as this in the old times on the slave markets, as gay and as noisy people looked and walked with the same indifference. "Let's begin right at the beginning," said the painter to friends. Walked into a narrow little passage lighted by a single lamp with a reflector. When they opened the door, a man in a black jacket rose lazily from the yellow sofa in the hall. He had an unshaven lackey face and sleepy eyes. The place smelt like a laundry and a vinegar. From the hall, a door led into a brightly lighted room, the Medicalico, and the painters stopped in the doorway, stretched out their necks, and peeped into the room together. Boner Sordo, Huguenot the painter, began making a theatrical bow. Abana Black Pisto said. The Medicalico, pressing his hat to his heart and bowing low, Vasil kept behind him. He wanted to bow theatrically too and say something silly, but he only smiled, felt awkward and ashamed, and awaited impatiently what was to follow. The Medicalico, pressing his hat to his heart and bowing low, Vasil kept behind him. He wanted to bow theatrically too and say something silly, but he only smiled, felt awkward and ashamed, and awaited impatiently what was to follow. In the door appeared a little fair girl, 17 or 18, with short hair, wearing a short blue dress with a white bow on her breast. "What are you standing in the door for?" she said. "Take off your overcoats and come into the salon." The Medicalico and the painter went into the salon, still speaking Italian. Vasil followed them irresolutely. "Gentlemen, take off your overcoats," said the lackey stiffly. "You're not allowed in as you are." Besides the fair girl, there was another woman in the salon, very stout and tall, with a foreign face and bare arms. She sat by the piano with a game of patience spread on her knees. She took no notice of the guests. "Where are the other girls?" asked the Medico. "They're drinking tea," said the fair one, Stepan. She called out, "Go and tell the girls some students to come a little later." A third girl entered in a bright red dress with blue stripes. Her face was thickly and unskillfully painted. Her forehead was hidden under her hair. She stared with dull, frightened eyes. As she came, she immediately began to sing in a strong, hoarse contralto. After her, a fourth girl. After her, a fifth, and all this Vasil saw nothing new or curious. It seemed to him that he had seen before more than once the salon piano, cheap gilt mirror, the white bowed dress with blue stripes, and the stupid indifferent faces, but of darkness, quiet, mystery, and guilty. Smile of all he had expected to meet here, and which frightened him. He did not see even a shadow. Everything was commonplace, prosaic, and dull. Only one thing provoked his curiosity a little. That was a terrible, as it were intentional lack of taste, which was seen in the overmantels, the absurd pictures, the dresses, and the white bow. In this lack of taste there was something characteristic and singular. How poor and foolish it all is, thought Vasil. What is there in all this rubbish to tempt a normal man, to provoke him into committing a frightful sin, to buy a living soul for a ruble? I can understand anyone sinning for the sake of splendor, beauty, grace, passion. But what is there here, what tempts people here? But it's no good thinking whiskers. Stand me champagne. The fair one turned to him. Vasil suddenly blushed with pleasure. He said, bowing politely, "But excuse me if I don't drink with you. I don't drink." 5 minutes after the friends were off to another house. "Why did you order drinks?" stormed the medical. "What a millionaire. Flinging 6 rubles into the gutter like that for nothing at all. Why shouldn't I give her pleasure? If she wanted, said Vasilov justify himself. You didn't give her any pleasure, madam. Got that it's madam who tells him to ask the guest for drinks. She makes by behold the mill the painter, began to sing Now Fallen to Ruin. When they came to another house, the friend stood outside in the vestibule, but did not enter salon, as in the first house, a figure rose up from the sofa in the hall in a black jacket with a sleepy lackey face. As he looked at this lackey at his face and shabby jacket, Vasilov thought, what must an ordinary simple Russian go through before fate cast him up here? Where was he before? And what was he doing? What awaits him? Is he married? Where's his mother? And does she know he's a lackey here? Thus forward, in every house, Vasilov involuntarily turned his attention to the lackey first of all in one of the houses. It seemed to be the fourth. The lackey was a dry, little puny fellow with a chain across his waist. He was reading a newspaper and took no notice of the guests at all. Glancing at his face, Vasilov had the idea that a fellow with a face like that could steal and murder and perjure. And indeed the face was interesting, a big forehead, gray eyes, a flat little nose, small closey teeth, and the expression on his face dull and impotent at once, like a puppy hard on a hair. Vasilov had the thought that he would like to touch this lax hair. Is it rough or soft? Oh, it must be rough like a dog's. Part 3, because he had two. Glasses, the painter, suddenly got rather drunk and unnaturally lively. Let's go to another place, he added, waving his hands. I'll introduce you to the best. When he had taken his friends into the house, which was according to him the best, he proclaimed a persistent desire to dance a quadrille de Medicalico, began to grumble that they would have to pay the musicians a ruble, but agreed to be as Vasabi the dance. Began it was just as bad in the best house as in the worst, just the same mirrors and pictures were there, the same coiffure and dresses. Looking round at the furniture and the costumes, Vasilov now understood that it was not lack of taste, but something that might be called a particular taste and style of Estre, quite impossible to find anywhere else, something to complete, not accidental, evolved in time after he had been to 8 houses. He no longer wondered at the color of the dresses or the long trains, or at the bright bows or the sailor dresses, or the thick violent painting of the cheeks. He understood that all this was in harmony, that if only one woman dressed herself humanly, or one decent print hung on the wall, then the general tone of the whole street would suffer. How badly they manage the business. Can't they really understand that vice is only fascinating when it is beautiful and secret hidden under the cloak of virtue? Modest black dresses, pale faces, sad smiles, and darkness act more strongly than this clumsy, tinsel idiots. If they don't understand it themselves, their guests ought to teach them. A girl in a Polish costume trimmed with white fur came up close to him and sat down by his side. Why don't you dance, my brown-haired darling? She asked. What do you feel so bored about? Because it is boring, Stammy Shadow. Then you won't be bored. Vasilov made no answer for a little while he was silent. And then he asked, what time do you go to bed? As a rule 6. When do you get up? Oh, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. And after you get up, what do you do? We drink coffee. We have dinner at 7 o'clock. And what do you have for dinner? Soup. Or she has a rule beefsteak, dessert, armadame, keeps the girls. Well, but what are you asking all this? Or just have a talk? Vasilov wanted to ask about all sorts of things. He had a strong desire to find out where she came from, were her parent alive, and did they know she was here? How she got into the house? Was she happy and contented, or gloomy and depressed with dark thoughts? Does she ever hope to escape? But he could not possibly think how to begin or how to put his questions without seeming indiscreet. He thought for a long while and asked, how old are you? 80, joked the girl, looking and laughing at the tricks the painter was doing with his hands and feet. She suddenly giggled and uttered a long, filthy expression aloud, so that everyone could hear. Vasilov, terrified, not knowing how to look, began to laugh uneasily. Alone smiled all the others, his friends and musicians, and the women paid no attention to his neighbor. They might never have heard. Stamia left it, said the girl again. Vasilov was suddenly repelled by her white trimming in her voice and left her. It seemed to him close and hot. His heart began to beat slowly and violently like a hammer. Let's get out of here, he said, pulling the painter's sleeve. Wait, let's finish it. While the Medicico and the painter were finishing their quadrille, Vasilov, in order to avoid the women, eyed the musicians. The pianist was a nice old man with spectacles, with a face like a Marshal Bosun. The fiddler, a young man with short fair beard, dressed in the latest fashion. The young man was not stupid or starved. On the contrary, he looked clever, young, and fresh. He was dressed with a touch of originality and played with a motion problem. How did he and the decent old man Get here, why aren't they ashamed to sit here? What do they think about when they look at the women at the piano and the fiddle were played by ragged, hungry, gloomy, drunken creatures with thin, stupid faces? Then their presence would perhaps be intelligible, as it was Vasil could understand nothing into his memory came. The story that he had read about the unfortunate woman, and how he found that the human figure with the guilty smile had nothing to do with this. It seemed to him that they were not unfortunate women that he saw, but they belonged to another, utterly different world, foreign and inconceivable to him. If he had seen this world on the stage or read about it in a book, he would never have believed that the girl with the white trimming giggled again and said something disgusting aloud. He felt sick, blushed, and went out. "Wait, we're coming too," cried the painter. "Part for I had a talk with my man Zell while we were dancing," said the medico. When all three came into the street, the subject was her first love. He was a bookkeeper in Smolongs with a wife and 5 children. She was 17 and lived with her pa and ma, who kept a soap and candle shop. How did he conquer her heart? Asked Vasil. He bought her 50 rubles worth of underclothes, Lord knows what. However, could he get her love story out of his girl, thought Vasil. "I can't, my dear chaps, I'm off home." He said, "Why?" "Because I don't know how to get on here. I'm bored and disgusted. What is there amusing about it? If there were only human beings, but they're savages and beasts." And going, "Please, Gisha, darling, please." The painter said with stall and his voice pressing close to Vasil, "Let's go to one more then to hell with them do come breaker." They prevailed on Vasil and led him to a staircase to carpet and the gilded balustrade. The porter, who opened the door of the panels, which decorated the hall, were still in the same Street style, but here it was perfected and imposing. "Really, I'm going home," said Vasil, taking off his overcoat. "Darling, please, please," said the painter, and kissed him on the neck. "Don't be so fatty, Grigory. Be a pal together. We came together. We go. What a beast you are, though. I can wait for you. In the street, my God, it's disgusting. Here, please, please, you just look on, see. Just look on. One should look on things objectively," said the medical seriously. Vasil entered the salon and sat down. There were many more guests besides him, and his friends, 2 infantry officers, a gray, bald-headed gentleman with gold spectacles, 2 young Cleanshaven men from the Surveyors Institute, and a very drunk man with an actor's face. All the girls were looking after these guests and took no notice of Vasilia. Only one of them, dressed like Ida, glanced at him sideways, smiled at something, and said with a yawn, "So the dark ones come." Vasilia's heart was beating and his face was burning. He felt ashamed for being there, disgusted and tormented. He was tortured by the thought that he had a decent, affectionate man. So he considered himself up till now despised these women and felt nothing towards them but repulsion. He could not feel pity for them or for the musicians or the lackeys. It's because I don't try to understand them. He thought they're all more like beasts than human beings, but all the same, they are human beings. They got souls. One should understand them first, then judge them. Gishka don't. "Go away, wait for us," called the painter, and he disappeared somewhere. Soon the Medico disappeared. Also, yes, one should try to understand. It's no good otherwise, thought Vasil, and he began to examine intently the face of each girl, looking for the guilty smile. But whether he could not read faces, or because none of these women felt guilty, he saw in each face only a dull look of common, vulgar boredom and satiety, stupid eyes, stupid smiles, harsh, stupid voices, impotent gestures, and nothing else evidently. Every woman had in her past a love romance with a bookkeeper and 50 rubles worth of underclothes, and in the present the only good things in life were coffee, a 3-course dinner, wine quadrilles, and sleeping till 2 in the afternoon, finding not one guilty smile. Vasil began to examine them to see if even one looked clever, and his attention was arrested by one pale, rather tired face. It was that of a dark woman, no longer young, wearing a dress scattered with spangles. She sat in a chair staring at the floor and thinking of something. Vasil paced up and down, and then sat down beside her, as if by accident. One must begin with something trivial, he thought, and gradually pass on to serious conversation. "What a beautiful little dress you have on," he said, and touched the gold fringe of her scarf with his finger. "It's all right," said the dark woman. "Where do you come from?" "A long way from Chernigo. In a nice part it always is where you don't happen to be. What a pity I can't describe nature." Thought Vasil, I'd move her by descriptions of Geneva. She must love it if she was born there. "Do you feel lonely here?" He asked. "Of course. I'm lonely. Why don't you go away from here? If you're lonely, where shall I go to start begging?" "It's easier to beg than to live here." Where did you get that idea? Have you been a beggar? I begged when I had enough to pay my university fees. And even if I hadn't begged, it's easy enough to understand a beggar is a free man at any rate, and you're a slave. The dark woman stretched herself and followed. With sleepy eyes, a lackey who carried a tray of glasses and soda water stand as a champagne. She said, and yawn again, champagne, said Vasil. What would happen if your mother or your brother suddenly came, and what would you say, and what would they say you would? Say champagne, then suddenly the noise of crying was heard from the next room where the lackey had carried the soda water. A fair man rushed out with a red face and angry eyes. He was followed by the tall, stout madam who screamed in a squeaky voice, "No one gave you permission to slap the girls in the face better class than you come here, and never slap a girl you bound or followed." An uproar. Vasil was scared and went white. In the next room, someone wept, sobbing sincerely, as only the insulted weep, and he understood that indeed human beings lived here, actually human beings who get offended, suffer, weep, and ask for help. The smoldering hatred, the feeling of repulsion, gave way to an acute sense of pity and anger against the wrongdoer. He rushed into a room from which the weeping came through the rows of bottles which stood on the marble tabletop. He saw a suffering, tear-stained face, stretched out his hands towards this face, stepped to the table, and instantly gave a leap back in terror. The sobbing woman was dead drunk as he made his way. Through the noisy crowd gathered around the fair man, his heart failed him. He lost his courage like a boy, and it seemed to him that in this foreign, inconceivable world, they wanted to run after him, to beat him, to abuse him with foul words. He tore down his coat from the peg and rushed headlong down the stairs. Part 5, pressing close to the fence. He stood near the house and waited for his friends to come out. The sounds of the pianos and fiddles gave bold, impotent, and sad mingled into chaos in the air, and this confusion was as before, as if an unseen orchestra were tuning in the dark over the rooftops. If he looked up toward the darkness, then all the background was scattered with white moving points. It was snow in the flakes coming into the light, spun lazily in the air like feathers, and still more lazily fell flakes of snow, crowded, whirling about Vasilov, and hung on his beard, his eyelashes, his eyebrows, the cabin, the horses, and the passers by all were white. How dare the snow fall in this street, thought Vasil, to curse on these houses. Because of his headlong rush down the staircase, his feet failed him from weariness. He was out of breath, as if he had climbed a mountain. His heart beat so loud that he could hear a longing came over him to get out of the street as soon as possible and go home. But still stronger was his desire to wait for his friends and to vent upon them his feeling of heaviness. He had not understood many things, and the houses, the souls of the perishing women, were to him a mystery, as before, but it was dear to him that the business was much worse than one would have thought. If the guilty woman who poisoned herself was called a prostitute, then it was hard to find a suitable name for all these creatures who danced to the muddling music and said long, disgusting phrases. They were not perishing, they were already done, for Vic is here, he thought. But there is neither confession of sin nor hope of salvation. They are bought and sold, drowned in wine and torpor, and they are dull and indifferent as sheep, and do not understand. My God, it was so dear to him that all that which is called human dignity, individuality, the image and likeness of God, was here dragged down to the gutter, as they say of drunkards, and that not only the street and the stupid women were blamed, for a crowd of students white with snow, talking and laughing gay, passed by one of them. A tall, thin man peered into Vasilia's face and said drunkenly, eyes one of ours logged, old man, my lad, never mind, walk up, never say die, uncle. He took Vasil by the shoulders and pressed his cold, wet mustaches to his cheek, then slipped, staggered, brandished his arms, and cried, "Out! Study there, don't fall." Laughing, he ran to join his comrades. Through the noise, the painter's voice became audible. "You dare beat women. I won't have it go to hell. Your regular swine in Medicico appear at the door of the house." He glanced round, and on seeing Basil, said in alarm, "Is that you, my God? It's simply impossible to go anywhere with you. I can't understand a chap like that." He kicked up a row. "Can't you hear?" he called from the door. "Jäger, I won't have you hitting women." The painter's shrill voice was audible. Again from upstairs, something heavy and bulky tumbled down the staircase. It was a painter coming head over heels. He had evidently been thrown out. He lifted himself up from the ground, dusted his hat, and with an angry, indignant face, shook his fist at the upstairs. "Scoundrels, butchers, bloodsuckers, I won't have you hitting a weak, drunken woman. Are you Jäger Jurgen the Medicico?" began to implore. "I give my word, I'll never go out with you again, upon my honor." I won't the painter gradually calmed, and the friends went home to these sad shores, unknowing the Medicico. Began an unknown power, entices behold the mill the painter sang with him, after a pause, now fallen into ruin, how the snow is falling, most holy mother. Why did you go away? Gishka, you're a coward, you're only an old woman, Basil was. Walking behind his friends, he stared at their backs and thought, one of two things, either prostitution only seems to us an evil, and we exaggerate it, or if prostitution is really such an evil, as is commonly thought, these charming friends of mine are just as much slavers, violators and murderers as the inhabitants of Syria and Cairo, whose photographs appear in the field. They're singing, laughing, arguing soundly now, but haven't they just been exploiting starvation, ignorance, and stupidity? There I saw them at it. Where does their humanity, their science, and their painting coming in the science, art, and lofty sentiments of these murders remind me of the lump of fat in the story. Two robbers killed a beggar in a forest. They began to divide his clothes between themselves and found in his bag a lump of pork fat in the nick of time. Said one of them, let's have a bite. How can you? The other cried in terror, have you forgotten today's Friday? So they refrained from eating. After having cut the man's throat, they walked out of the forest confident that they were pious fellows. These two are just the same when they pay for women. They go and imagine they're painters, and scholars listen you too. He said angrily and sharply, why do you go to those places? Can't you understand how horrible they are? Your medicine tells you every one of these women dies prematurely from consumption, or something else your arts tell you, that she died morally still earlier. Each of them dies because during her lifetime she accepts on an average, let us say 500 men, each of them is killed by 500 men, and you're amongst the 500 now. If each of you comes here in places like this 250 times in his lifetime, then it means that between you killed one woman. Can't you understand that? Isn't it horrible? Isn't this awful? My God, I knew it would end like this, said the painter. Frowning, we oughtn't have had anything to do with this fool of a blockhead. I suppose you think your head's full of great thoughts and great ideas. Now, devil knows what they are, but they're not ideas. You're staring at me now with hatred and disgust. But if you want my opinion, you better build 20 more of the houses and look like that there's more vice in your look than in the whole street. Let's clear out Bella, damn him. He's a fool, he's a blockhead. And that's all he as human beings are. Always killing each other, said the medico. That is a moral course. But philosophy won't help you get by. The friends departed at Dine Square and went their way. Left alone, Vasil began to stride along the boulevard. He was frightened of the dark, frightened of the snow, which fell to the earth in little flakes, but seemed too long to cover the whole world. He was frightened of the street lamps, which glimmered faintly through the clouds of snow. An inexplicable, faint-hearted fear possessed his soul now. And then people passed him, but he gave a start and stepped aside. It seemed to him that from somewhere there came and stared at him women, only women. It's coming on. He thought, I'm going to have a fit part 6 at home. He lay on his bed and began to talk, shivering all over his body. Live women live. Oh my God, they're alive. He sharpened the edge of his imagination in every possible way. Now he was a brother of an unfortunate, now her father, now he was himself a fallen woman with painted cheeks, and all this terrified him. It seemed to him somehow that he must solve this question immediately at all costs, and that the problem was not strange to him, but was his own. He made a great effort, conquered his despair, and sitting on the side of the bed, his head clutched in his hands, he began to think, how could all the women he had seen that night be saved? The process of solving the problem was familiar to him as to a learned person, and notwithstanding all his excitement, he kept strictly to this process. He recalled to mind the history of the question, its literature, and just after 3 o'clock, he was pacing up and down, trying to remember all the experiments which are practiced nowadays for the salvation of women. He had a great many good friends who lived in furnished rooms, false fine, Galishkin, Nachev, Yeshkin. Not a few among them were honest and self-sacrificing, and some of them had attempted to save these women. All these few attempts, thought Vasil, rare attempts, may be divided into 3 groups, some having rescued a woman from a brothel, hired a room for her, bought her a sewing machine, and she became a dressmaker, and the man who saved her kept her for his mistress, openly or otherwise, but later when he had finished his studies and was going away, he would hand her over to another decent fellow. So the fallen woman remained fallen. Others, having bought out, also hired a room for her, bought the inevitable sewing machine, and started her off reading and writing, and preached at her. The woman sits and sews as long as it is. novel and amusing, but later when she is bored, she begins to receive men secretly or runs back to where she can sleep till 3 in the afternoon, drink coffee, and eat till she is full. Finally, the most ardent and self-sacrificing take a bold, determined step they marry, and when the impotent, self-indulgent, stupefied creature becomes a wife, a lady of the house, and then a mother, her life and outlook are utterly changed, and in the wife and mother, it is hard to recognize the unfortunate woman. Yes, marriage is the best and maybe the only resource, but it's impossible, Vasilov said aloud, and threw himself down on his bed. First of all, I could not marry. One woman would have to be a saint to be able to do it, unable. To hate, not knowing, disgust. But let us suppose that the pain of Medicico and I got the better of our feelings and married, that all these women got married. What is the result? What kind of effect follows the result? Is that while the women get married here in Moscow, the small lengths bookkeeper seduces a fresh lot, and these will pour into the empty places together with women from Saratov, Nizhny Novgorod, Warsaw. And what happens to the 100,000 in London? What could be done with those in Hamburg, the oil in? The lamp was used up and the lamp began to smell. Vasilov did not notice it again. He began to pace up and down, thinking now. He put the question differently. What could be done to remove a demand for fallen women? For this, it is necessary that the men who buy and kill them should at once begin to feel all the immorality of their role as slave owners. And this should terrify them. It is necessary to save the men's science. And art apparently won't do, thought Vasilov. There is only one way out to be in. Apostle. And he began to dream how he would stand tomorrow evening at the corner of the street and say to each passerby, "Where are you going and what for fear God?" He would turn to the indifferent cabmen and say to them, "Why are you standing here? Why don't you revolt? You do believe in God, don't you? You do know that this is a crime and that people will go to hell for this. Why do you keep quiet then? True, the women are strangers to you, but they have fathers and brothers, exactly the same as you." Some friend of Basilov's once said of him that he was a man of talent. There's a talent for writing, for the theater, for painting. But Basilov's was peculiar talent for humanity. He had a fine and noble flair for every kind of suffering, as a good actor reflects in himself the movement and voice of another. So Vasilov could reflect in himself another's pain, seeing tears. He wept with a sick person. He himself became sick and moaned if he saw violence done. It seemed to him that he was the victim he was frightened like. A child and frightened ran for help. Another's pain roused him, excited him, threw him into a state of ecstasy. Whether the friend was right, I do not know. But what happened to Vasilov when it seemed to him that the question was solved was very much like an ecstasy. Sobbed, laughed, said aloud the things he would say tomorrow, felt a burning love for the men who would listen to him and stand by his side at the corner of the street, preaching. He sat down to write to them. He made vows. All this was more like an ecstasy in that it did not last. And Sil was soon tired of the London women, the Hamburg women, those from Warsaw, crushed him with their mass as the mountains crushed the earth. He quailed before this mass. He lost himself. He remembered he had no gift for speaking, that he was timid and faint-hearted, that strange people would hardly want to listen to and understand him. A law student in his 3rd year, a frightened and insignificant figure. The true apostoleship consisted not only in preaching, but also in deeds. When daylight came and the carts rattled on, the streets, Vasilov lay motionless on the sofa, staring at one point. He did not think any more women or men or apostles. All his attention was fixed on the pain in his soul, which tormented him. It was a dull pain, indefinite, vague. It was like anguish and the most acute fear and despair. He could say where the pain was. It was in his breast, under the heart. It could not be compared to anything. Once on a time, he used to have a violent toothache. Once he had pleurisy and neuralgia, but all these pains were as nothing beside the pain of his soul. Beneath this pain, life seemed repulsive. The thesis, his brilliant work, already written to people. He loved the salvation of fallen women. All that which only yesterday he loved or was indifferent to remembered now irritated him in the same way as the noise of the carts, the running about of the porters, and the daylight. If someone now were performed before his eyes a deed of mercy, or an act of revolting violence, both would produce upon him an equally repulsive impression. Of all the thoughts which roved lazily in his head, two only did not irritate him, one at any moment. He had the power to kill himself, the other, that the pain would not last more than 3 days, the second he knew from experience. After having lain down for a while, he got up and walked wringing his hands, not from corner to corner, as usually, but in a square along the walls. He caught a glimpse of himself in the glass. His face was pale and haggard, his temples, hollow, his eyes bigger, darker, more immobile, as if they were not his own, and they expressed the intolerable suffering of his soul. In the afternoon, the painter knocked at the door. "Gregory, are you at home?" he asked, receiving no answer. He stood musing for a while and said to himself good-naturedly, "Out he's gone to the university, damn him," and went away. Vasilov lay down on his bed and burying his head in the pillow. He began to cry with the pain, but the faster his tears flowed, the more terrible was the pain. When it was dark, he got into his mind the idea of a horrible night which was awaiting him, and awful despair seized him. He dressed quickly, ran out of his room, leaving the door wide open, and into the street without reason or purpose. Without asking himself where he was going, he walked quickly to Sadovia. Street snow was falling as yesterday. It was thawing. Putting his hands into his sleeves, shivering and frightened of the noises and the bells of the trams and of passers-by, Mazil walked from Sadovia to Sukher Tower, then to the Red Gate, and from here he turned and went to Balmana. He went into a public house and gulped down a big glass of vodka, but felt no better. Arriving at Razguli, he turned to the right and began to stride down streets that he had never in his life been down before he came to that old bridge under which the river Yutza roars, and from whence long rows of lights are seen in the windows of the Red Barracks. In order to distract the pain of his soul by a new sensation, or another pain, not knowing what to do, weeping and trembling, Vasilia unbuttoned. His coat and jacket bared his naked breast to the damp snow and the wind. Neither lessened the pain. Then he bent over the rail of the bridge and stared down at the black turbulent Yauza, and he suddenly wanted to throw himself head. First, not from hatred of life, not for sake of suicide, but only to hurt himself, and so to kill one pain by another. But the black water, the dark deserted banks, covered with snow, were frightening. He shuddered, and went on. He walked as far as the Red Barracks, then back, and into a wood. From the wood to the bridge again. No home. He thought of home. I believe it's easier, and he went back on returning home. He tore off his wet clothes, and hat began to pace along the walls, and pace incessantly, until the very morning, part 7 the next morning, when the painter and the medical came to see him. They found him in a shirt torn to ribbons, his hands bitten all over, tossed about in the room, and moaning with pain. For God's sake, he began to sob, seeing his comrades. "Take me anywhere you like, do what you like, but save me for God's sake. Now I'll kill myself." The painter went pale and was bewildered. The medical, too, nearly began to cry. But believing that medical men must be cool and serious on every occasion of life, he said coldly, "It's a fit you've got, but never mind, come to the doctor at once, anywhere you like. But quickly, for God's sake, don't be agitated, you must struggle with yourself." The painter and the medico dressed Vasil with trembling hands and led him into the street Mikul. "Sergeyevich has been wanting to make your acquaintance for a long while," the medical said on the way. "He's a very nice man and knows his job splendidly. He took his degree in '82 and has got a huge practice. Already he keeps friends with the students. Quicker urged." Vasil, male Sergeyevich, a stout doctor with fair hair, received the friends politely, firmly, coldly, and smiled with one cheek. "Only the painter and Mira have told me of your disease already," he said. "Very glad to be of service to you. Well, sit down, please." He made Vasil sit down in a large chair by the table and put a box of cigarettes in front of him. Well, he began stroking his knees. "Let's make a start. How old are you?" He put questions, and the medical answered. He asked whether Vasilia's father suffered from any peculiar diseases. If he had fits of drinking, was he distinguished by his severity or any other eccentricities? He asked the same questions about his grandfather, mother, sisters, and brothers, having ascertained that his mother had a fine voice and occasionally appeared on the stage. He suddenly brightened up and asked, "Excuse me, but could you recall whether the theater was not a passion with your mother?" About 20 minutes passed. Vasil was bored by the doctor stroking his knees and talking of the same thing all the while. "As far as I can remember your questions, doctor," he said, "you want to know whether my disease is hereditary or not." "It is not hereditary." The doctor went on to ask if Vasil had not any secret vices in his early youth, any blows on the head, any love, passions, eccentricities, or exceptional infatuations. To half the questions habitually asked by careful doctors, you may return no answer without any injury to your health. But male Sergeyevich of the Medicalico and the painter looked as Though if Vasilov failed to answer even one single question, everything would be ruined. For some reason, the doctor wrote down the answers he received on a scrap of paper, discovering that Vasilov had already passed through the Faculty of Natural Science and was now in the law faculty. The doctor began to be pensive. He wrote a brilliant thesis last year, said the medical. Excuse me, you mustn't. Interrupt me, you prevent me from concentrating. The doctor said, smiling with one cheek. Yes, certainly that is important for the anonymous. Yes, do you drink vodka? He turned to Vasil. Very rarely, another 20 minutes past the medical began Sovo to give his opinion of the immediate causes of the fit, and told how he, the painter, and Basil went to Estre the day before yesterday, the indifferent, reserved, cold tone in which his friends and the doctor were speaking of the women, and the miserable street seemed to him in the highest degree strange. Doctor, tell me this one thing, he said, restraining himself from being rude. Is prostitution evil or not? My dear fellow who disputes it, the doctor said with an expression as though he had long ago solved all these questions for himself. Who disputes it? Are you a psychiatrist? Yes, said psychiatrist. Perhaps all of you are right, said Vasil, rising and beginning to walk from corner to corner. Maybe, but to me all this seems amazing. They see a great achievement in my having passed through 2 faculties at the university. They praise me to the skies because I've written a work that will be thrown away and forgotten in 3 years' time, but because I can't speak of prostitutes as indifferently as I can about these chairs. They send me to doctors, call me a lunatic, and pity me. For some reason, Vasilov suddenly began to feel an intolerable pity for himself, his friends, and everybody whom he had seen the day before yesterday, and for the doctor. He began to sob and fell into the chair. The friends looked interrogatively at the doctor, he looking as though he magnificently understood the tears and the despair and knew himself a specialist in this line. Approached Vasil and gave him some drops to drink. And then when Vasil grew calm, undressed him and began to examine the sensitiveness of his skin, of the knee reflexes, and Vasil felt better when he was coming out of the doctor's. He was already ashamed. The noise of the traffic did not seem irritating, and the heaviness beneath his heart became easier and easier, as though it were thawing his hand. Were 2 prescriptions, one was for Caliban, the other morphia. He used to take both before he stood still in the street for a while, pensive, and then taking leave of his friends lazily, dragged on towards the university.